This is one of those times of year that, interestingly enough, some of you will know this. Heather and I, my wife and I, and our two kids, before we moved to Lubbock, we lived in Oklahoma previous to this, in Enid, Oklahoma, and I preached there for a little over 2 years. And one of the things about this time of year that I truly miss is it's almost harvest season, or it is harvest season, at least for some of them, when it comes to the wheat. And for some of you who know me a little bit better, you know that I love to run. One of the things that did not take very long is we were living along the west side of town, and I've told some of you this before, but we were living on the very edge of the west side of Enid. And about a quarter of a mile from we actually lived in an apartment complex for the first year we were there, about a quarter of a mile off the way was a dirt road. I mean, we were right on the very edge. And one of my favorite things about this time of year is that I could run, and within about a half mile, I could turn around, and based upon just the way in which the land sloped, I could not see the city at all. And I would look around me, and the entire field, all of the fields around me were just beautiful golden wheat. And I remember getting to the outside of the city and just turning around and looking and feeling like, finally, and no offense, but as a preacher every now and then you're like, yes, no one can call me. No one can talk to me. Keep your crazy problems, like that's kind of one of those things. And you get outside and you start to turn around and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. And I remember having this interesting moment. Heather and I were going through some difficult times. Many of you know this. We've not been shy about sharing this, but we've dealt with depression inside of our family. And I remember needing to just get away for a little bit. And I just took off running. And I ran, and I was kind of inside of my own thoughts, and I remember running for a while. And I look up, and I do remember getting to this point. This is probably 6 months, 7 months after we'd been in Enid, and I got, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 miles down the road, and it kind of hit me like, I don't know where I am. And I had been so kind of in my head thinking through some things. I had made some turns, and I got to a point where I was like, I don't actually know how to get back. I mean, I know that direction is Enid, so I'm just going to, I think that direction's Enid. I remember running, starting to turn around, and that's when kind of panic sat in. Because I'm the person always with the plan, and now I had no plan, and I'd left my phone at the house. And it was interesting not having the phone and not having GPS and just kind of jogging and trying to figure out, have I seen this before? I don't think I've seen this before. I wasn't paying attention, so I don't know. And then I remember, just because it's Enid, Oklahoma, and I'll throw in a little bit of a barb there, I remember running at one point being like, I don't remember this couch on the side of the road, but there it is, My Oklahoma friend, sorry, Billy, I'm going to go ahead and throw that one out there. But I do remember during this time thinking to myself, I'm actually really glad that I don't have my phone. And I don't have to worry about getting back on time. I just need to just kind of take my time and get back. And I remember deciding, you know what, I'm not going to run anymore. I'm just going to walk. I'm just going to walk, and I'm going to enjoy. It's interesting when you start thinking about how connected we have to be to our devices. We've been talking about this. If you've been visiting with us if you're visiting with us, we have been going through this series over the last little bit called Be Here Now. What does it look like to be present? Not just being physically present, but to truly be locked in to what does it mean to be present with the people around you. And we live in a world that is inundated with constant distraction with technology, and over and over and over, we are not present. We're not even present to ourselves and to our own thinking. In a lot of ways, that's terrifying, to just be alone with our thoughts. I can tell you, as I began to walk back to Enid, looking at these beautiful fields, I went through this journey, even over those few minutes of running and walking, where I felt very alone, very anxious, scared, feeling like I have zero control in what is happening in my life right now. Worried for my kids, for my wife, trying to figure out being this far away from family, how are we going to do this with 6-7 months of history with a bunch of people we don't know. And I remember getting to this point where this breeze went across the field. And I remember thinking to myself, here is this vast, beautiful area. And I look up and I keep thinking to myself, here is the God that grows the fields year in and year out. And he gave us his Spirit. It's going to be okay. I don't know how, but it's going to be. And in the midst of kind of taking a step back, we found God. I found God. And there was a peace and a presence there that was like, okay, I needed to not be distracted for a little while. I needed to go through the difficulty of wrestling with my own thoughts and then being overwhelmed with just the greatness of who God is. It was during that time, and many of you will think I'm lying when I say this, but it was during that run that I found Sabbath rest. Because as we talked about last week, Sabbath rest is about recuperation. It's about reorientation to life and to who God is. Yes, at times it is about rest. It is about sleep. It is about getting away, and it is about doing nothing. But over and over and over, if we only look at Sabbath rest and taking Sabbath rest from all of the distractions and all the things going on in our lives, if we only look at Sabbath rest as leisure time, then we miss out on recuperation and reorientation to who God is, to who we are. And somehow, in tiring myself out, I found a reorientation. If you will remember, I walked you through Genesis chapter 1 last week, and do you remember, we say this all the time, humanity, we know this, humanity is created on the 6th day. What is their first full day of life like? It's rest with God and seeing God rest. From the very get-go, what sits at the heart of the human relationship to God is rest and total acceptance from him. It is not being judged or defined by your productivity. It is not being judged or defined by your activity or the things that you do in the world. From the very get-go, humanity's first day with God is defined by Sabbath rest. An orientation to who he is and what this whole rhythm of life should look like. And we cannot have a conversation about fruitfulness until we understand we live from total value and worthiness before God. Sabbath is empowering, and it's encouraging, and it's convicting. And from there, we get a chance to clearly see who we have been called to be. Only from being connected to God can we clearly see what activities are kingdom-like and fruitful. And I want to read for you this passage this morning. John gives us a picture in John chapter 15. Some of us will know this passage front and back. Others of us may have never heard this passage before. Allow this text to wash over you for a moment. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he removes, and he prunes every branch that produces fruit so that it will produce more fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains on the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him produces fruit, because you can do nothing without me. If anyone does not remain in me, he is thrown aside like a branch, and he withers. They gather them, throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want and it will be given for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and prove to be my disciples. Now, the interesting thing about this passage is I believe, based upon who John is, that this passage is supposed to be encouraging. This passage is supposed to be uplifting. It is supposed to be an affirming passage. And yet I can honestly tell you that for the majority of my life, I have not heard this passage preached this way. It's almost like an ultimatum of sorts. As though God is looking at us, or Jesus is speaking on behalf of God and saying, the branches connected to me are loved and they produce fruit, but the ones not connected to me are thrown into hell. Grr, you know? Like, suck it up, figure it out, start producing, or you're done. And we turned it into some sort of works-oriented way of Christianity. I think this passage is an invitation. I think this passage is a promise. Let me explain. In verse 2, you hear the conversation kind of begin. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he removes, or most of our versions will say, he cuts off. And he prunes every branch that produces fruit so that it will produce more fruit. And I believe we have misinterpreted this passage horribly. One, because of the word cuts off there is actually not even the word. The word in Greek here, arrow, actually means lifted up. So a better translation of this text should be, every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he lifts up. And he prunes every branch that produces fruit so that it will produce more fruit. Do you hear the difference? One translation is about somehow God walking in and cutting off and throwing away and getting rid of. And the other is about this God who lovingly comes in and he lifts up. Let's flesh out the metaphor for just a moment. I am not a brilliant vine grower in any way. No one can kill a plant quicker than me, I promise. Okay? But let me tell you a few things that I have learned. One of the most integral things about a vineyard is that the branches are off the ground. The best way for them to grow is to be off the ground so that they can bear the best of fruit. The new branches, and any branch that isn't cared for, has this seemingly natural tendency where it's going to just grow downward. And eventually, it begins to grow along the ground. They're not going to bear a lot of fruit down there. In fact, on the ground, they're going to get dirty, and when it rains, they're going to get muddy. And if left unattended, they will mildew. They're going to become sick, and they'll become useless. So the vine dresser will not allow this to happen. The vine dresser goes in. He sees the branches that are growing towards the ground. He sees the ones that may even be already on the ground, and he lifts them up. He doesn't walk through and look at the ones who didn't make it as though it's some sort of, well, you had your shot. But he walks through and with tenderness cares for the branches, and he begins to wash them off. Please tell me you're entering into this analogy, this metaphor on a spiritual level here. He begins to wash them off and lift them up so that they can grow to the best of their possible ability. And for those that aren't growing in the direction that they need to be growing, he gives them course correction, because you've seen trestles, or you will see them tied up so that they can grow in the direction and grow the best fruit that they possibly can. He's about course correction, not dismissal. He's about redirection for fruitfulness, not about writing us off because we're worthless. Verse 3 goes on to say, you are already clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. He's telling his 12, you have been lifted off the ground. I have spoken to you and given you my word. You have course correction for who you need to be when it comes to kingdom living and fruitfulness. This is what he's trying to do for all people. And why? Because of verse 8, my Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit, kingdom fruit, and prove to be my disciples. You prove to be of me. So let's come back to this conversation of relationships with technology. We've talked about this for the last few weeks. We've talked about our relationships to phones, tablets, television, and let me give you some statistics that hopefully will do some humble course correction for us. On average, parents report that their children spend 5 hours every single weeknight using an electronic device. On average, parents outside of work will spend 5 hours every single day on some sort of device. More than 60% of people check their phones within the first hour of waking up in the morning, and the fastest growing demographic on Facebook for the last 10 years is empty nesters, and particularly women empty nesters. Yes, we all have grandchildren we love. It's probably not all looking at pictures of grandchildren. One statistic claimed that more than 50% of families report complaining that devices have destroyed their ability as a family to have conversation. And why wouldn't they? Statistics also tell us that 48% of kids ages 9 to 12 already have a phone. 88% of kids ages 13 to 17 already have a phone. 70% of parents sleep next to their phones. 72% of preteens sleep next to their phones. And 82% of teenagers sleep next to their phones. 50% of parents say their family cannot have a real conversation anymore because we have been addicted to our phones. 20% of kids ages 13 to 17 and 30% of young adults ages 18 to 24 come across pornography every single week. And 80% of teenagers and young adults say they have no one in their life that can help them with their addictions to pornography. See, the interesting thing about all of this is when you go back into our analogy, into our metaphor that we get from Jesus Christ, based upon how that analogy and metaphor has worked in the past, well, let's just cut off the branches that don't produce good fruit and we'll write them off. The problem is that our churches are full of these people. Our families are. We don't need to be written off. We need some course correction. And I believe the church is supposed to be the safe place for the world to receive course correction from, how Savannah put it, our God whose identity is love. So let's do some course correcting this morning. I told you this a couple of weeks ago. Teenagers probably will not like this series. I gave up caring what teenagers think when I left youth ministry. Not really. I actually tell you this because I actually love kids. I still love kids. Let me give you a couple of easy things this morning you can do maybe to reorient yourself. The first thing you need to know is that you actually have a say, and please remember this, you will always have a say over the time and the space in your life. Period. Okay? No one's taking your time or space away from you. That is something we have say over. In a lot of ways, what I find really, really interesting is I can walk into your home and you can walk into my home and you can see, based upon the way we even arrange our furniture, what sits at the center of our life. Walk into anybody's home and the furniture is gathered around and centered towards a TV. And the truth of the matter is, and Heather is I don't know that she's on board with this, but I'm the man and I'm going to make her do it. Not gonna happen. She's not here this morning. That's the only reason I said that. Yeah. Next week, there'll be a new preacher. But we've already decided we got to rearrange our furniture. We need to rearrange the furniture in our home to say what our life is really all about. And relationships sit at the center of what my home is supposed to be. Not a television, not screen time, not anything else. And it may mess up our ability to watch the game or to binge Netflix or anything else like that, but at the same time, what it may do is maybe just maybe, you'll have 2 or 3 more intimate, real conversations each week, which will bless your marriage, which will change the destiny of your children. Let me go ahead and throw out some other things. If your kids don't have to have a phone, do not get them a phone. Okay? Seriously. I get in the world that we live in today with people going all over the place that it's very nice and convenient for your children to have a phone based upon sports schedules, based upon extracurricular activities, based upon you name it. But let me throw out one idea. How about we just buy a really cheap family phone that can call and text? Yeah, there's already teenagers like shaking their heads no, like please no. You'll be fine. Buy a cheap family phone, throw it in the drawer. And when your kid actually has to have that phone, give them that phone. And when that extracurricular activity is over, take the phone back. How about no devices in the bedroom? Any bedroom. At all. If you don't think I'm serious, for those of you who visited, last week we gave away 25 alarm clocks. I kid you not. Like real alarm clocks. Get the devices out of your bed, out of your bedroom. Nobody needs to sleep next to their phone. Nobody needs to sleep next to a tablet. That's not necessary. Not only that, I would argue that all screen time for teenagers, any child that is living in your home, should be in a public common area. All screen time. There's too much access, even for just curious minds, to certain things that are not fruitful and life-giving. Husbands, wives, your spouse should have access to your phone at any time, whenever they want. There are no passwords or passcodes that you keep from your spouse, period. Your children do not get a passcode protection on their phone or their tablet without you knowing what it is. I would argue that your children should never download an app to any of their devices unless they can explain to you why it's life-giving. Period. Every teenager is so mad right now. Again, you'll be fine. But let's maybe hit a little closer to home for us who are adults. How much time is given to Netflix? Mindlessly surfing social media. How much power does CNN or Fox News have over your mood and your view of the world today? Oh, and that's real, right? Not just teasing the teenagers now. Because isn't it interesting, because we're ramping up all sorts of political things going on. It's already started, okay? There's 3 billion people running for the Democratic nomination right now, okay? Everybody's looking to take out Donald Trump, okay? We get it. This is the world we're about to jump back into. And what's really crazy is what's going to happen over the next few months and even the next year is you are going to be tempted to believe that we can solve all of the world's problems with this next election, or if this next person gets in, they'll ruin it all. Are we defined by Jesus Christ or not? If we are, who cares who sits in the White House? Our king is on the throne. Let's act like it. Let's let our social media look like we believe that. Let's allow our time to be fruitful towards kingdom life types of things. Let's mentor our children into choosing relationship over fear or having to fit in. Let's begin to create homes that are anxiety-free, because so much of the rest of the world is just pouring out anxiety on us. Because everything is about being fruitful, and what so much of my heart and so much of what we need as people is we need this loving, kind gardener and this Father in heaven who wants to give us course correction so that we might be the most fruitful people we can possibly be, not growing along the ground, getting dirty and becoming sick and unable to produce kingdom fruit. You can have a marriage defined by Jesus Christ. You can have that. You can have children who grow up in a home and they know absolutely, without a doubt, every single night, my parents aren't perfect, but they have chosen Christ as their Lord, and that says something about who they are. Kids, you are not defined by the circles that you run in. Just throw something out there. Most of you will never even hang out with your high school friends after you leave. But you will need the peace of Jesus Christ for the rest of your life. Parents, I heard Andy Stanley say this one time. Talked to the adults in the room and talked about how their anxiety level about the direction of our country was actually scaring the kids. This is what he said, and I'll say it to you. Knock it off, you know? Like, we get so wrapped up in the direction of all these things that are going on, and we forget that the strongest presence in the world today is the Spirit of God, bringing recreation. We are not a people driven by fear. We're not a people driven by anxiety. We're not a people driven to be distracted. We are a people driven, and we are a people defined and identified by incarnation. Our God became physically present to us so that we might become His people. We have been called to be image bearers of that incarnation. We must be physically present to one another and raise our kids to see physical presence, a love and a sacrifice for others as the highest calling of humanity. That is what it means to be human. Anything less than that is not human. And the beauty of this is, again, here is the God who lovingly walks in as the vine dresser. And He begins to wash and to clean and to tenderly care for His people, to give us course correction so that our lives are pointed in the right direction so that we might bear kingdom fruit. That is who our God is. And I want to finish simply by praying for that Spirit to lead us, to guide us, to overwhelm us, to convict our hearts of the goodness of who He is. Let's pray.